Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, may Allah bless you all with peace and ease and good health and well-being. Here we are on the question and answer forum here on Saturday night. And a few people asked last week regarding marriage and divorce and some of the Islamic rulings, as well as the idea of rights. It was asked about mortgages, buying a house on a loan, and the concept of Islamic banks. And another question was about life insurance and the rulings thereon. So today we're going to talk about each one of these. We have a chat on the right side of the screen. So if you have any questions as we go through that you would like answered, or if there's something that wasn't clear, please go ahead and put it on the chat, and then I'll address it after each portion that I go through from the discussion, inshallah. So the first issue we have is marriage. What is the Islamic concept of marriage before we go into anything else? I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of this looking at marriage as just a matter of rights. This is a very, very core, fundamental part of Islamic identity to build a family. And so the Quran talks about it. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. So here in Surah Ar-Rum, and we have verse number 21. From his signs that you will come to know him by, from the divine truths of his legislation in creation, is that he has created spouses, that he has created from among humanity, male and female, that they would live together in peace and tranquility. So that's the first legislation or divine law about marriage, is that husband and wife were meant to live in peace, in tranquility. Taskunu ilayha. This is sakina. And he says, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. And the fundamental quality between them is a deep loving affection that they work to cultivate and maintain and preserve, and a sense of compassion, mercy, and forgiveness between them in their dealings. So that's the fundamental reality of marriage, and all marriages should be built on those foundations. A healthy communication of a friendly, respectful, easygoing discourse, peaceful, tranquil relationship, a deep sense of love and affection, and a sense of compassion and forgiveness and mercy. So in Surah An-Nisa, verse number 19, وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. You must live with your wives with the best standard of character, as is known through the legislation of the Quran and the Sunnah, as well as the custom and the standard reality. So what the scholars have commented on this verse, that any husband, before he marries his wife, in the process of looking into compatibility, must understand where she's coming from in her family upbringing, how she thinks, her attitude, her cultural way of inclination, and so forth, and he must accommodate that. Otherwise, he should not marry her if he's not ready to accommodate her in her full reality of who she is. Ma'ruf is a word that means all that is known to be good in Islam and in the actual reality that people are living in. And in Surah Al-Baqarah, in verse number 187, هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنَّ. So your wives are like clothing to you, and you are like clothing to them. You know, clothing is that which conceals what you don't want to be known from the world. Clothing is that which gives you warmth. It represents your style. It's something that adorns you. So all of these things, the husband and wife should be for each other in all of the beautiful metaphorical meanings therein. And in Surah An-Nisa, again, verse number 21, وَأَخَذْنَا مِنْكُمْ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا. So here Allah is talking about after the marriage is established, that this is a huge responsibility. So He tells the men that your wives have taken from you a very, very strict, very serious covenant and contract. Meaning, as a man, we have to fulfill the rights and the responsibilities in terms of treating our wife with all of the previous verses that we mentioned. And so then talking about the concept of interactive responsibilities and roles and rights in verse number 228 of Surah Al-Baqarah, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. So husbands and wives have a similar responsibility towards each other in understanding their reality and being the best they can towards each other. And then at the end he says, and the men were given a degree above their wives. So the scholars talked a bit about this, and the main understanding that they have is that men were given this responsibility of upkeep, as we'll talk about in the next verse. And so the men are given the responsibility to provide for and work and pay all of the bills and so forth of their wives. And God has given them this responsibility in that He has chosen them to be the one who is responsible for all major final decisions, because there cannot be two people with equal say-so when serious decisions are being made that affect everybody in the family. So the men are responsible for that, whereas the women will not be responsible on the Day of Judgment for that. And so then in Surah An-Nisa, الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ بِمَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بَعْضَهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. That God has made the men the caretakers of women, those who are making sure that everything is taken care of, that they're paying all the bills, they're providing all of the needs, they're caring for and making sure that all of the needs in terms of spirituality, education, everything is taken care of. And so that's a responsibility for the men. So in terms of rights, I like to just keep it very simple in terms of have these character traits that the Quran tells us towards each other, and understand each other's general customs. So as it says that a man must live with his wife with the best standard of conduct and understand her reality. And the other verse says, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. And then they are responsible of taking care of their husbands in the same manner. And Allah here in the Quran knows that throughout the world there is a patriarchal history and there is a male dominance. And so He commanded the men directly, and then He confirmed the equal right of the women in the other verse. So communication, obviously when you talk about premarital counseling, I cannot over stress the need for premarital counseling. Why? Because these are two people coming from different backgrounds, and if they're ideally going through an Islamic courting process where families are in the know and it's not private meetings and it's all part of an Islamic process, they need to ask serious questions and understand each other's way of thinking and their background and their families and how they are beforehand, so that then later they're not like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? And even if, unfortunately, if somebody went the wrong route and then fell in love separate from the family and got into this what I call fake love, because really whenever people are not genuinely looking for a spouse, then they will kind of put on a different face. They will act in a different way to try to get what they're looking for out of that relationship. Whereas when you know that this is not about a physical relationship, there will be no physical relationship unless there is an actual marriage that is for life, then you tend to be more serious about it. So either way, you definitely need to, some people say, oh, well, we've been together for months or for years, and so we know. Well, when you're talking about living together as married couple forever, you can see the true colors of many people come out after that. So you need to have the premarital counseling. So then if you've had that, then when you're married, as was mentioned, you should have this healthy communication, and then interact accordingly, be willing to compromise and engage in a reasonable interaction as is natural in Islam. So in terms of these kind of rigid rights people are always looking for, the wealth of a wife, of any woman, is her wealth. In the modern, age now, it seems like a lot of men aren't paying attention to this point, because I've come to find out in many situations where the woman is working and she's making this money, and the man is expecting her to pay bills and all of these things, and that's totally against his responsibility as a husband, as the Quran has very clearly laid out in Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse number 34, that he is responsible to provide for everything for his wife: food, clothing, shelter, medical and hygienic needs, whatever is the needs that she has, he has to pay for all of that. Now, if they agree at the time of the marriage contract and they make that as a condition, that she says, you know what, I'm agreeing and I'm not going to hold this over his head that he's somehow not fulfilling his responsibilities, I've agreed to do this from the get-go, then that's fine. But otherwise, there needs to be something in writing. So if there's a disagreement on serious matters that affect the whole family, see, one of the problems is that some men have chosen to interpret this responsibility and this divinely given somehow authority to the husband, as though now he's the controlling authority over the house and everything in it. So he starts nitpicking and commanding about everything that everyone needs to do, and treating his wife like she's a child or something like this. And this is completely unacceptable and not Islamic. And the Prophet ﷺ acted in no such way at any time to any one of his wives. They are grown women, and they are an adult, and they are your spiritual equal. It is only in matters that affect the entire family, where there is a serious discussion and consultation, which is the obligation of Islam on any leader. And so obviously the husband has to genuinely consult with the family about serious issues that everybody's going to be affected. And so if there's a disagreement, the responsibility and the final decision rests in the man's, the husband's decision. So now that we've said that, there are many hadiths, and modern psychology confirms that men's physical desires are quite needy. And this is his right in the marriage relationship. So that needs to be taken care of and fulfilled. And at the same time, the Prophet ﷺ was approached by more than one woman from the Ansar in Medina. And the Prophet ﷺ ordered men not to neglect the pleasure of their wives in the physical engagement as well. So before we move into divorce, I wanted to make sure that everybody's clear on these rights, or this understanding of marriage between a husband and a wife. So if there's any questions on the marriage element, feel free to ask. If not, we'll go ahead and move on to the issue of divorce. Okay, so now we will go ahead and move on to the issue of divorce. So in terms of divorce, there's a whole surah called Surah Al-Talaq. It's a surah of the Quran called divorce. And otherwise, in other places, the concept of divorce has been mentioned and talked about in 15 other places. So this hadith that gets thrown around as though it's the standard truth of all things holy, أَبْغَضُ الْحَلَالِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الطَّلَاقِ, that is actually a weak hadith, which basically what the hadith means is the most disliked of the permissible things to Allah is divorce. So the hadith by the chain of transmitters has various weaknesses in it, and it doesn't make sense even from an actual text, because Allah did not permit something except for that it is not disliked to him. That's why it's not makruh, disliked. So why would he permit something that he doesn't like? He would say something against it. So we know that talaq is legislated. If you want to understand the hadith metaphorically, in that maybe it was said in some sort of context, in a general meaning, it would be meant that whoever is thinking about divorce a lot, or mentioning divorce a lot over normal, disagreements and problems that happen in marriages, then of course that is very disliked, because you're talking about the dissolvement and destruction of a family over minor issues. Talaq should not come up unless people are getting drunk and using drugs and stop practicing religion and, claiming disbelief or fornication and, attacking each other physically and constantly verbally and things like that. When these major things happen, people aren't paying the bills or whatever, it's like people left for a long time and they don't, where is this person? Or people doing strange things with strange people and not, having any basis for that. Here's where, now divorce could come up. And so the divorce is something that should always be discussed in the context of a very serious, controlled, well-mannered discourse. Like, these are our problems. We try to solve it. We bring in a very trustworthy person. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ شِقَاقَ بَيْنِهِمَا فَبَعَثُوا حَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهِ وَحَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهَا. So the ayah that talked about it, if either family or friend, someone who's really close to this person and that person. Now, number one, in the Islamic character, as well as this standard understanding of the psychology, we should never be bringing family members or friends into our marital issues. Anytime we have a problem with husband or wife, we should not be bringing family or friends into it unless it gets to the point where we genuinely fear like it's gone so far that people just don't love each other anymore. People don't love, there's some abuse happening of some sort. You see what I'm saying? See, in this case, you would bring one trustworthy person that will, talk reasonably in this. So each one would bring someone and they would have a discussion, all under control, realizing after that, if it doesn't work, then in the modern era, now we have the science of psychology and therapy. And, by the way, in all of the scientific research that they do, there is this heavy emphasis on dealing with people according to their cultural norms and belief systems. So there is no idea that many Muslims have developed, we always have these conspiracy theories in the Muslim community, they're all out to get us or whatever. But no, the general understanding of all therapists and people who go into this concept of marital therapy is to try to solve the people's problems according to their best interests as they believe it. Right? So you can't force your beliefs or your values or your culture on them, because they'll both be bothered that, or one will feel like you're being unjust. And so you have to deal with them on their own terms as their reality is. So seeking the counseling and helps. So after you've done the counseling, whatever, or there's an immediate abuse and people are being abused and, whatever, you go to the police to solve that. Yes. And again, there is no teaching of Islam that it is haram to call the police when someone's physically harming you, no matter who it is. If somebody's physically attacking you, you have every right to protect yourself by either leaving or defending yourself with whatever means you have the ability to, or calling the police. And either way, that situation should be stopped. Al-darar yuzal. All harm should be removed in Islamic law. There is no such thing, as we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, as living in a miserable marriage. So the Quran talks about how divorce works. It says, "At-talaqu marratan, فَإِمْسَاكٌ بِمَعْرُوفٍ أَوْ تَسْرِيحٌ بِإِحْسَانٍ." So talaq could happen in what we call the return divorce. I'll talk about that in a moment. Either you stay married with the best standard of character and you work on your, interaction and engagement, or you divorce in a respectful way, in the best manner, taking care of each other's best interests, not abusing each other, not trying to take each other all their wealth or whatever. You see what I'm saying? That's what the Quran is telling us. So now there's something called the return divorce, which is the standard, Islamic system that a man, if he has gone through all of this, consulting, and he's tried to solve the problem has remained. He's done everything he could to make a healthy marriage, and he just sees that it won't work. So he would pronounce, "You're divorced," to his wife. He has to say it in very clear terms with no ambiguity that you're divorced, or now I'm divorcing you. I have divorced you. That's it. I have divorced you in this marriage. I'm done with you. He may not mean that. He may mean something else. But if he says that, now it is an abuse and an oppression for a man to keep bringing up divorce over all these different disagreements, to keep saying, "Oh, if this happens, I'm going to divorce you. If this, I divorce you. That man has some sort of a problem in his character, whoever is doing that. This is not something you just throw around to try to, get your way. This is a very serious declaration. So if he pronounced it, then there is a 3-month period. In this 3-month period, now basically 3 menstrual cycles, he will look into the possibility of is that the best decision? And so he will see how his interaction with the wife. In this way, as long as there's not immediate abuse happening, then they stay in the same house, right? So they're still married, but there's a divorce that's been pronounced, and there's a 3-month waiting period until it becomes final. If within that 3-month period, he says, you know what, I take you back, or he approaches her in a physical way as a wife. In these cases, she has to go back. It's not a decision that she has, and then they are married again. But he has to do this according to the ayah. فَإِمْسَاكٌ بِمَعْرُوفٍ أَوْ تَصْرِيحٌ بِإِحْسَانٍ, that he will keep her as his wife with the best character that he could give, and he knows he can do it, and he's ready to put his effort into that, or he lets her go with the best character, and so forth, moving forward. Now, if the 3 months went by, okay, then that becomes a final divorce, and then it becomes what we call ba'in, which means now they will move away from each other, ideally, because he still has to make sure until she can transition into either her father, brother, uncle, a new husband situation. After this, during the iddah, according to the stronger opinion, he needs to still provide for her needs. So she would stay in that house while he is out. And so that's after the 3 months. Now, if they wanted to make another contract and there's only been 1 or 2 divorces, they can, and then they can go back. So what they would do is, in the American legal system, there is what we call tawqil al-aqd, that the right of divorce is actually enforced by law through the courts. There is no imam in the United States that has any authority whatsoever to enforce a divorce. That is not our business. We have no business with that. So people, these people who say, oh, well, we'll go to the imam and get a divorce. No, the imam has nothing to do with divorce. You go to the court. The court gives the divorce. They have that. You don't say, oh, well, there's the non-Muslim court. Okay, well, everything's non-Muslim. Now, don't follow any of the laws. You don't pay taxes. You don't do X, Y, and Z. You don't get car insurance. No, you have to follow the law of the land. Awfu bil-uqud. Once you stepped foot here, you have made a covenant, either by visa or citizenship or whatever it is, that you will abide by and respect the laws of the land. And if you do not respect the laws of the land, Islam is totally against vigilantism and corrupt, shady character mentality. So you would have to leave and go somewhere where you agree with the law of the land, that you can live there and be the Muslim that you want to be. You can't go somewhere, because I can make a lot of money, but I'm going to totally go get around all the corners to try to find my way where I can, not have to follow any of the laws. That is totally against everything Islamic, and we should never think like that, much less live like that. So a woman has the right of divorce here, as she would in a Muslim country. You see, some of the women, they're being told by their husbands and by these imams who don't get what's going on here. I don't understand what they're doing, because they're like, okay, you have no business with divorce. You just have to be patient with your husband. And this guy's abusing her, calling her names, cussing at her, hitting her, whatever, whatever. And then he's like, yeah, you have no recourse. You just have to live, be patient. Don't make him mad, as though it's her fault. This is actually spiritual abuse from the imam to the woman, right? So actually, she can go to the court or go to the police or whatever she has to do to get out of her situation when she knows that she is being. Now, that's between her and Allah. If she's just making up stuff and there's no reason, and she just want to take his wealth, then she's a criminal in Islamic law and a sinner, and she's a thief, and that's Allah will judge her, right? But there's nothing we can do to stop her, right? That's her business between her and Allah. Now, there's something called khula, which is still her right here. So she can say, you know what, you're not abusing me, but I really just don't like you. As it happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. This ruling happened, and the woman came to the Prophet ﷺ. She said, well, I don't think he's an evil man. He's not an abusive man, but I just really don't like him. I don't like his general attitude. I don't like interacting with him. I'm not attracted to him. So then the Prophet ﷺ went to the man and said, look, she doesn't want to be married to you anymore. You gave her your orchard, and she's going to give it back to you. So you should take it back. Meaning what? Okay, you gave her this dowry. Now take the dowry back, and now the marriage is done. Okay, so that's That's the concept of divorce. So now we have concluded the concept of divorce. Does anybody have so talaq is a word that means divorce. Talaq is divorce. One of the brothers asked. It seems everybody here is clear. Okay, so everything's clear on divorce. We can move forward to what I'm imagining many people came for, which is the whole to buy or not to buy. That is the question. Okay. So there is no question here on divorce. Okay. So now, in terms of buying a house, so buying a house, the question we have to ask ourselves, what is the value of it? Allah answered that question in Surah An-Nahl, verse number 80. Wallahu ja'ala lakum min buyutikum sakana. Allah has decreed for you that you will have homes to live in, right? And to my knowledge, back in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there wasn't such a thing as renting homes. Because basically the way homes were made was families would get together and they would put together these bricks. And of course, you don't have this super sophisticated homes like they are now, right? So basically everybody just got together and then built their home and all of that. And then they lived there and that was their home. It was much easier. But it was a necessity of life. You see my point? So first, let's look at, okay, there is a necessity in having a home because it gives stability to the family, right? And for them to pay rent for many, many years will waste their wealth, right? So let's look into what does Islam say about wealth. The preservation of wealth and the healthy exchange of wealth and the means of people to access wealth in a lawful, just way is one of the 5 fundamental objectives and necessities of Islamic law. You have to preserve human life. People need to be alive and well to live their religion and do what they do. Secondly, we promote monotheism in the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we respect everybody's right to believe in whatever they believe and practice their religion. And number 3, we have to protect the wealth. People have to have wealth. They have to be able to have means to gain wealth. You know, in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, he felt very bad whenever someone stole, and he found out that this person stole because there is a big drought and there is no, he's a farmer, he has no crops, and there's no way in his village for him to make any money. He literally has no way to make any money. So when Omar found out this guy stole a bunch of wheat and grain and stuff to make bread so his family can eat, some of the local judge of the Islamic court there was going to take off this guy's hand. And so then Omar went and asked him why you stole it. He told him, then Omar let him go. He didn't take his hand. And then he gave him some money from the wealth. And he said, the state should be here to make sure that your family is eating. Nobody should be needing to steal to make a basic living, right? So the preservation of wealth and the means for people to have access and the means to grow in their wealth at all levels of society is important. Now, one of the things that Islam is doing is prohibiting interest. So the question of why is interest prohibited? Is it just interest in and of itself is a terrible thing, or what is it? So we know that interest is, as somebody has agreed upon, I will buy this from you and I'll pay you off. And then interest is, as it gets longer, as the time increases, I owe you more money. That's what it means. That I end up owing more and more money over time. You see what I'm saying? And so that's what the interest is. And so what happens is people became literally enslaved in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And I will say to a much lesser degree, here in America, many people are enslaved to so many forms of interest, whether it be houses, cars, credit cards, all of the above. Most people, they're looking like they've got all this stuff, but they're just, making 50, 60K, and they're struggling just to pay all their bills. And, they've got this wife and kids and all these things and responsibilities and a house and all these necessities, and they're not able to do it. And they're just basically drowning in debt, hoping that somehow they will get out of that. So in the Prophet ﷺ's life, the Muslims, they dealt with interest transactions all the way up until the year before the Prophet ﷺ passed away. So the prohibition of interest in the Islamic law towards the end of Surah Al-Baqarah, it came, أَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا, that God has permitted the buying and selling of goods, and the using your skill set to earn money for your abilities, what you do, and so forth. He's permitted that. You can sell your skill set or your products, but you cannot take money for money, because money is not something that should be sold for more money, because that's money. You see what I'm saying? So basically, it's a system that helps the rich get richer, and it makes the poor, it makes the people who are struggling to survive get more and more in debt, particularly when some hardship happens, right? So that's why. And so it was prohibited. Why? Because now the Muslims have authority over Arabia. That's why it was delayed so long, because the Muslims had no means of taking authority over the economic system of Arabia. If it was prohibited to deal with interest in the beginning of Islam, so many Muslims would have found themselves in very difficult situations, right? Because you can't, I mean, it would just make it hard on you, because you're the one, that is out of luck. Whereas all of the whole society around you is functioning in this way, and you can't stop it because you're just a small group of Muslims and you don't control the economic system, right? So once Muslims had control, then Allah prohibited it. And it is prohibited until the end of time. For all places and all times, it will be prohibited as an evil system of earning wealth, right? So that's an agreement. There's no question about that. No scholar has or ever will come and say, oh yeah, well, I don't think interest is a problem anymore. I've decided that no longer interest is a problem. It has led to all of the financial oppression, and not all of, I would say a large portion of the financial oppression in the globalized economy and the world banks and so forth is coming from this interest system. It was the main cause of the economic meltdown that happened in 2008, in which many people lost their homes. I think now that we say that, now the question is, okay, so how do we deal with buying a house and all of that? Here we live here, and what about Islamic banks? I'm going to say I don't think that it makes sense to say Islamic bank. Islamic Finance Center or whatever, okay. But the concept, when we say al-mustalahat, the terminologies of the day, when you say a bank, it's a place where people take money for money and then, make a whole lot of money because people can't pay them back on time. That's basically what a bank is. And that's totally against Islam, right? So you can't say Islamic bank. It's like, the slow sprinter, it didn't make much sense. If he's a sprinter, he's going fast. So the ideal system in Islam is you would have a loan that you agree upon with some finance center or whatever or person, and you'd agree on a price. Here's the price. It doesn't matter how much. If for whatever reason I agree to buy this iPhone for $10,000, I bought my iPhone here for $10,000 from this guy. I'm gonna pay him off in 15 years. I'm paying how much a month? That's I agreed with him. He's selling me that for that much for that time. That's not interest. Just because I'm an idiot and want to buy it for that, or I find myself in that situation, for whatever strange reason, that's not interest, right? So someone would say, but here's where the problem comes with these Islamic banks and this new system is that when you buy from them, right, number one, they make you pay for all the stuff, the Islamic bank. They make you pay for all the insurance and the taxes, and they own it. It's their house, right? You're paying monthly dividends for them to earn money. Basically, it's almost like a rent, but they call it murabaha to get out of that. Some of them say, it's a type of ijara, which is rent, which means now you have two contracts. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited having two contracts on one situation. So, okay, I'm going to sell you this and rent it to you at the same time, right? So the Prophet ﷺ has prohibited such a thing, right? But even though they say, okay, it's murabaha, a lot of times, people throw out Islamic or Arabic Islamic sounding terms. Now everybody's like, oh, wow, this is Islam. It sounds Quran, and so now they're going to be like, okay, this must be, I should buy into it wholesale and not question it. Because look, it's called, even the organization called La Riba, no riba. So that's not how we judge things. Scholars said, Al-ibra laysat bil-asma innama hiya bil-musammayat. The point of law of judging something is not what you call it, it's what it is. It's what, in effect, its applied reality is. If I call myself, like this guy was calling himself the Khalifa of the Muslims in Iraq, Abu Bakr or whatever. And this guy is saying, I'm the Khalifa. well, he's saying that, but nobody agrees. No scholars in the world are accepting him as such a thing. And so he's really just some guy who's part of some new political movement that has invented some very evil, blood, thirsty way of trying to spread his political interests. And that group that are around him, and they use some Islamic statements to make everybody buy into it. So personally, I think that Muslims should just find an Islamic way of doing loans. So, I agree with you. I'm going to buy this phone from you for $500, right? And so over 5 months, I'm going to pay you $100, right? So what happens, right? So if after 2 months I pay you, I paid you $200, right? Then, what you can do is if you're going to sell me this for $500, I can't pay you. You can choose to renegotiate the actual price for, what we're going to sell it for, something like that, or most likely what you would do is you'd say, I'm going to sell this phone and then I'll give you your $200 and then but I'll take my $300 and whatever is left of what it can sell for, I'll give you back out of your $200, but that's your equity. And that's some sort of way of doing it, And so here I got full equity, depending on what it sells for, right? And so the person who's selling it needs to know what the general sell is and make a reasonable amount, or the person buying it and so forth. They need to agree on that. So here, if you buy a house on this Islamic bank, after 5 years, you don't even own, a few $1,000s of this house. You actually were better off renting this house, probably. You've been paying a whole lot of money on the profits, right? So now after 5 years, you're not going to really make much out of it at all, And so there's a problem fundamentally in my mind with what they call Islamic banks, right? Many of the great scholars here are saying, yes, we need to support, like Guidance has a really good model. It's very Islamic. It's more Islamic than all the rest. I've looked into that. I agree. I totally agree. If that makes someone feel better, and they do have some good Islamic, influences that have adjusted your standard bank one. But at the end of the day, there's core fundamental things which for me are problematic, right? And you can just call things what you want, but at the end of the day, we know what it is, especially considering the fact that people are selling your contract to these American banks, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and all of that. And then the terminology changes whenever they go on the back end back to interest. They just give you a terminology you're comfortable with in your contract. So that's, for me, a bit of a problem there, and, many scholars I've met agree. And most of them are scared to say it in public. Why? Because they're scared that they'll get fired from their job, or people will shame them and all of that. So at the end of the day, if we're saying okay, well, you can't buy from this Islamic bank, then people are saying, well, now I have to rent. So we said, why is interest prohibited? It's to preserve the value of the middle class and the poor. You see what I'm saying? That's why it was prohibited, because these people are sucking up all their wealth for something that's not even really worth that. It's worth way less than that, right? And it's just the system is forcing them to time over time to pay so much more, right? And so this prohibition of the system altogether, when he says the curse of God is on the one who took it and gave it and wrote the contract and witnessed it, all that is about getting rid of the system. It's not saying they're all equally wrong. Any rational, logical person would know the one who's taking all the money from the interest is definitely, without any hesitation, way worse than the one who is giving it. The one who's giving it is losing all their money, right? What is their benefit, right? They're just trying to have something that they can have any way they can, right? And they're assuming that they're going to be able to pay it off in the reasonable amount of time that they agreed upon. But there's another interesting point that some people have made. Say, for example, you agree with the bank, Islamic Bank, Bank of America, local credit union, which local credit unions are usually better system altogether. If you agree, 15 years, I pay you this much per month. At the end, we're done. I agreed on that. How is that interest anyways? I mean, of course they said what it is per month and all that stuff. But if you agreed on a time and how much you're going to pay and you pay that off and that's what you agreed in the beginning, technically that's all an Islamic contract. The problem comes in when you pull out early and then you see that you didn't really get any equity out of it. You see what I'm saying? Or you got a small amount of equity and you ended up paying them lots of profits, right? And then when you want to sell it, you find out that you really didn't own much of that house, right? And then you paid all that, all the insurance, all of the yearly taxes on it, and then you never really even owned it. So the whole thing comes problematic whenever you can't just buy the whole thing out. But if you bought the whole thing out, of course, okay, I'm gonna buy this house for this much over this 15, 20 years, and this, and you paid it all out, then technically you agreed on an amount and how much you'll pay every month, and then you paid all that off. So that's, I don't see where that would be an Islamic thing. And so they're saying, well, those that are prohibiting this one and they're saying like that, they're saying, well, they added interest and that's why you paid a whole lot more, but you agreed to pay them that up front. So they didn't really add based upon being late, which is the whole concept of interest, you see. So whatever they want to call it, they can call it whatever they want to call it. You're calling it, I pay you this much and then I own it after this much time. You see what I'm saying? So now there is a system in Islam called ad-dururat tubih al-mahdhurat, that the necessities permit the things that are generally prohibited. So we say, okay, what is a necessity? Necessity is something that you have to have it to live. So then there's something below the necessity. It's called al-haja. It means it's really important to have, but you won't die without it, but you have a very difficult life, right? And so they said that we look into the haja, how serious it is, and it could be treated, this need could be treated like a necessity, right? And so they said that the house is one of those things. And so there's the Fiqh Council of North America, Fiqh Council of Europe, many great scholars such as Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, Sheikh Faisal Mawlawi, and many other great scholars. They all have written these long fatwas that to buy a house for your family as your home of living, in reasonable means, right, is allowed to you in this situation. And they're saying that it's a conditional. So for example, you're a husband and wife, you just got married. Why do you need to buy a house? You can live in a very small one-bedroom efficiency apartment, whatever, and you can just save up money, just save your cash, and then you start to have kids, and then, now you're going to need a house, okay? You're building a family, you've kind of built some, you have the cohesion, your marriage is stable and strong, you've got this strong understanding, now, maybe you can buy a house. So the scholar said, you have your family here, you started your family, you're going to buy a house. So you're not buying it for flipping the house. I don't know of any scholar who allows this. There's no justification for taking any business type loan, whether you're buying a house or goods or whatever, that the scholars pretty much across the board have prohibited that, because now here you are, just trying to make money off of getting interest loans. And there's a lot of, it's haram to do that in the first place because there's no necessity here. You could get a job doing something else, or you could get a halal loan, start with a small business, find some good Muslim, give you $10,000 or whatever, and then you start your business and then you pay that back Islamically, just straight up, like that. So I don't see, any need for that. So the conditions of buying a house in the West by all those great scholars who made these fatwas is that it's a necessity for you and your family to have stability, and that you buy one house for your family that you need to live in, and it's according to your reasonable expectations of having a family and what your plans are, right? And you're not doing it for resale, So that being said, if there's any questions, it says, if a woman initiates divorce, does she have the right to child support and alimony? Going back to this one. Okay. So it doesn't matter whether she initiates it or not. There is a scholarly opinion in some of the verses of the Quran that were mentioned about a husband taking care of his ex-wife for the iddah. So many scholars have said for this iddah, it's there. But here, many scholars here in the West, they're looking at our specific reality. And they're saying, in the Muslim world, You have a whole strong, thriving zakat. You have a big family, supportive family. So you have, your family is there, your, father, your aunt, your brother. But if you have kids and all of that, and you've got your own situation and so forth, you don't have, so many sisters don't have recourse to any of that. They don't have any way to get that. So the American system understands that, and it was made for this reason, so that women do not become homeless, right? So that women do not find themselves with nothing. So of course, there's a large body of scholars who said, yes, whatever the law of the land is, that it's assessing her need not to oppress the husband, but to make sure that she has with her children a stable life, that she gets her bills paid and things like that, because it might be very difficult for her to work. And if she does, then she has to pay all this child care costs and things like that. So all of those come together, and that's where they said that, alimony and child support is part of the law of the land, and there's a justified reason for it. So the other question was, NC law requires separation for a year before you can divorce. If that's the case, and I have heard that before, then the husband needs to get out of the house, because he is still responsible for her until the divorce is final. Because technically in Islamic law, until the court issues a divorce, there's no final batin divorce, because there's a whole fatwa written by Sheikh Faisal Malawi rahmatullahi alayhi. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he was a great scholar from Lebanon, and he lived in Morocco on the courts, and he was big. He visited Europe and America a few times, and he was big on addressing the fact that all of our fiqh books were written in a context where the Muslims were, the Islamic law and the Islamic state was there. And so you had all this structure of Islam around them, you see, whereas there has not been any Islamic law written from the perspective of a scholar living in a land where they have no Islamic authority, you see. So Faisal Molawi, he looked in, he said, you know what? The concept that we do have in the mainstream understanding historically, tawkilul aqd. If a man said, to his brother, I give you the right to, authorize divorce in my relation, then that would be an authorization of divorce. So the authorization in America of divorce is final in the courts. That's where it is final. If they are split, then it's like talaq batin, then they should stay separated for that amount of time. This brother here is asking the question, what's the difference between conventional banking and Islamic financing? In the proper Islamic financing, here's how it works. The Islamic financing is going to pull in the money from investors and from people who need loans, and they will basically take some, administrative costs, not as murabaha or anything like that, from someone who needs a loan, and then they will take all these investors' money and they will invest it into halal stock. So whether it be apartment buildings, things like, toilet paper or diapers, there will never be the no need for toilet paper and diapers. We'll always have it. So those type of investments that people are always going to buy that stuff. Technology like Apple, everybody's always going to use Apple. It's always going to go up. You see what I'm saying? Amazon, those type of things. So an Islamic finance would invest the investors' money into that, and that's how they'll make money. And then people so it's not like savings, meaning money for money. It's savings based upon investment, right? And they won't put it in any haram ways of making money, right? And so then the one who comes to buy it. So for example, I bought a car in Kuwait from the Kuwait Finance House. In my research, Kuwait Finance House is probably the most Islamic, most high quality Islamic finance system in the world. So I bought this car. I went to this guy. He has a dealership, and he's trying to sell me this car for 1,500 dinars. Okay, and so I liked it. I drove it around and everything. And then I went to Kuwait Finance House. I said, you know what? I only have 600 dinars. I just want to buy this. Can you finance it for me? They're like, okay, let's make sure that we send it to our car. They have a place that they have a contract with, that they do the electric. They look at everything, on the car to make sure it's working right. They hook it up to the tests. And so then they did that. It came out fine for its mileage and everything is normal and everything. So I bought my car. I have my car. And then they said, okay, here's what it is. we're going to buy the car from this guy. They bought it from him, $1,500. Now it's their car, right? So then they told me, we're going to sell it to you for $1,750 over this amount of time, over the next year, 2 years, right? And so you're going to pay us this much per month. And then every time you pay a payment, you're getting full equity into the car. That's what you get. You're getting equity. Like I paid my, 75 dinars a month, and then I'm getting equity. I now own 600 because I paid 600 dinars down. Now after my first payment, I own 675 dinars of that car. To where now, if they need to sell it, they'll look into selling because I say I can't pay my bills. So they won't say, okay, now we're going to add interest to it because there's no such thing as interest in Islamic finance. It's haram. What they're going to do is they're going to say, either we'll give you some means to, wait, some time. We'll give you the benefit of the doubt, or we'll sell it, and then what you owe us, we'll get that, and then we'll give you back whatever is else. So ideally, I would get my 625 back, right? But if I don't, because we can't find somebody to pay what I was willing to pay for it, then I will just get whatever's left in the equity from that. The American finance system of the banks here is like, it's totally in the favor of the bank from A to Z, right? So when you pay your monthly payment for your house, say you put $5,000 down on your house, right? And then you're going to pay monthly payments of $900. So for the first many years, you're only actually getting equity of like $200. The $700 is their interest. It's their profit. They're getting that, and then if you sold the house after a year, you wouldn't even get the priority at all. The bank's they're going to have it to where they get back whatever they wanted back, and they can liquidate more of your property. They can take your car from you. You see what I'm saying? So the banks here is very problematic, and so that's why we don't do that. So so the question is, can you buy a home to rent it to others? So again, the standard opinion of all the scholars I have read, and the logic of it makes perfect sense. If you want to buy something to rent it, you need to have the money. If you don't, then you're not that wealthy, so you can't. And actually, I know of a couple of brothers who tried this, and they went in debt. They're like, oh yeah, now mashallah, I'm going to buy this thing and then I'm going to rent it out. And so that's how I'm going to make money. And then hopefully over the 15, 20-year time, now I have that as my property. And so I just basically the rent. But what happened was all these problems, and then the house messed up, and then they didn't take care of it, and the renter was no good, and then they had some hardship in their own financial situation. All these things happen, right? And so that's why we would avoid all of those. Now the question is, what is the ruling on remarrying the original divorced wife? No problem. So say you want to, say for example, in Islam, you have a 3 menstrual cycle period, right? So now you said divorce, and then now within 3 months, you decided, you know what, I want to take it back. But say the 3 months went, right? So if the 3 months go in Islamic law, okay, that now it requires both to agree to marry again, okay? And so she would, he has to move out until the courts can figure out the wealth and do all that. And they say it's a whole year. So within that year, if it's only been 2 divorces and not 3, okay, then you can say, you know what, we dropped the divorce, we're not divorcing, and then you move back in and you're just fine, right? Some women, when it comes to their money, rely on Islam. When divorced, revert to the American law to get half the man's wealth. Comment. So that is a very common way of putting the issue. So back to our point. We don't live in an Islamic state, and we don't have an Islamic system. And usually the convert sister, her family's against her for becoming Muslim. They're not going to help her. And in the American culture, it's almost never that a woman got divorced that her family starts taking care of her after that. That's just not our culture. You cannot force Eastern Muslim cultures on an American reality. Even now you have Muslims growing up here, and they don't think like that. It's not that they're right or wrong. The issue is the way it is. You see what I'm saying? So when she goes to the court, number one, it's not her that she's trying to get, it's the law. By North Carolina law, we live in North Carolina, the property will be split no matter what, right? And so she's not being all conniving and shady. That's just going to happen, split the property half. That's how it's going to be, right? And so that's the law of the land. And in terms of alimony and child support is Islamic, 100%. A man has to pay for every single penny of needs of the children, and part of that is where they live. You see what I'm saying? And so they call that alimony in the American legal system, right? So a woman is never responsible for a penny in her life in Islamic law. That's God's decision. That's not mine. It's not, a woman is not. So if it was ideal Muslim society, the woman, when she got divorced, can go back to her father, her uncle, her brother, and they will bring her in with no questions asked and no problem, and the whole family will totally accept it as normal, right? Here in America, that's not going to happen. That's going to become a big problem, right, for everyone involved, right? So the American law knows that, and so it's saying we need to make sure that this woman who has these kids, she doesn't end up homeless or with a serious problem. You see what I'm saying? It's really easy for a man who doesn't have the kids in his house, right, to go out and try to find some other wife. It's much more difficult for the sister to find some other husband who's willing to take on all these kids from this other guy. You see? So her situation is she's more prone to being weak and harmed. So the law is taking care of her for that. So a lot of Muslims tend to picture it in the, she's taking the American system. Well, why? It's just like the whole thing about the meats. It's like, why are they shocking and bolting those animals? Well, it's actually the animal rights organizations who came up with these ideas, because in whatever science they had figured out, they said that when you slaughter the animal's throat and they're still alive and all of that, they're awake and all of that, then this hurts a whole lot. So they said you need to shock it or bolt it so it doesn't feel this pain as it dies, right? So that's basically why they said that. But does American law make man own half of her salary? I don't understand that question. So so her salary is her salary in Islam. Nobody can ever take her money. So it's Islam that is perceived to be oppressing men. It's Islam that's saying we can't ever ask for her money at all, right? So the reason why Islam is saying that when there's a divorce after the 3-month period, many scholars said during the 3-month period, whether they're in the house or not, if they're in the house for sure, but even if it's out of the house, then he has to provide for all of her needs and financial things. After that, she will revert back to the father, the uncle, the brother, whoever, right? And so even then in the courts, in ancient Islamic things, if she doesn't have any of those, the courts will, put zakat on her. We don't have that big of a zakat here in America. We don't have some huge zakat fund, right? So in a classical, when these fiqh books were written about how to deal with this, there was a strong basis of zakat money. There's a huge, reservoir. So if that woman doesn't have father, uncle, brother, any of that, then they will pay all her bills and the husband doesn't have to deal with it, right? So here in America, they do have a system of welfare, but they don't want the welfare to take care of all the women. They're saying that the men, kind of like they're putting it on him. Even the Quran talks about الرجال قوامون على النساء. Some people choose to perceive that as the men are dictators over their wives, right? Obviously, that's not what is being said. What it means is men are responsible caregivers. They're leaders. A good leader makes the ones that they are leading, that they feel, cared for and understood and communicated with and respected, right? I think we'd all agree here that if someone's oppressing someone, they're a bad leader, right? If they're using their authority and their power to cause harm or discomfort or problems for that person, then now they are an oppressor, right? And so if a husband didn't do his due diligence and there was a divorce, right? Then, the American law and even to a certain extent, Islamic law, they're saying that, at the end of the day, the leader bears the responsibility in the failure of the institution, right? So when divorced, we apply American law, but when married, we apply Islamic law. Nope. I think that it's the same, actually. In Islamic law and So let's stop looking at our relationship as the rules of rights of Islamic law. Let's look at it as a loving relationship of two people who have in front of Allah chosen to live the rest of their life together. So Muslims tend to look at things in this rules and regulations. Raising kids that way, they're running away from Islam. Dealing with their wives that way, running away from Islam. We need to stop thinking we're all controllers of authority and enforcers of rules and see ourselves as servants of God, who is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the compassionate, the merciful, right? So we should, in our engagement, not see that marriage, I don't like this thing about the rights. When we say the rights, it's like, okay, my rights and your rights. It's like governments attacking the unions or something like this. We should see it in terms of, a genuine care for each other and a desire to make each other happy at all costs. This is ma'ruf. That's what we're being commanded in the Quran too. So I don't look at it as law. I look at it as natural spirituality that we should do. Then when there's a divorce, I feel like here's where the law kicks in, because we need to establish justice. So what I would advise, say, for example, there's no kids and the sister's a doctor. You know what I'm saying? This is a different situation. Sister's a doctor. She's banking 150 G's a year, right? There's a divorce. They don't even have kids, right? I would advise her, say to the courts, you know what? I'm passing on this. I don't need any sort of alimony, and I don't need half of his wealth. He doesn't make as much as me. Here, this is normal Islamic character, what she's doing here. But what is usually the case is she doesn't have a job. She's got these kids. She doesn't know what she's going to do. Marriage is miserable. She had to get out of the situation. They're not want to be married now. And many times, I'm going to tell you hundreds of times, the husband is too arrogant to get counseling. He's right. He knows everything. She's wrong. That's it. You're a woman. You're weak. I'm strong. I know everything. And no counseling. And then she's like, okay, I'm going to the court to get divorced. They're like, what are you doing? Going for your rights. If you would have been a good leader, you said, you know what, we really should talk. I don't understand what's wrong here. I'm not able to figure this out. Let's go and make the necessary precautions of building a future for our family here. And so there's no shame. So a lot of people have a bit of shame. It's like, oh, if I go to counseling, then I'm some crazy maniac. No. Everybody has different levels in their life of mental illness, as it were. And if Dal could correct me, am I wrong? We all go through ups and downs and who we are and what we're about and inclinations, DNA, environmental conditioning, nurture and nature and all that good stuff, right? So when we have problems that we can't solve with our rational faculties, we must go to people who can help us. And so in the case of human behavior and marriages, those are people who have studied for hundreds of hours, thousands of hours. How does it work and what is successful and what is wrong and all of that. And so that's where they come to the conclusion. So I don't see any other questions. Inshallah, if you have any questions for next week, please send me an email. We can deal with any questions. Oh, I forgot about the insurance. The brother had asked about the insurance. Yeah. Okay, yeah, the brother asked about insurance. So I'll just give the life insurance. Okay. So when you say life insurance, you're talking about two fundamental problems here. You got interest, because that's how they take your premiums and they invest them in all these interest-bearing, banks and stuff. And they give loans. They have, at the other side, they give loans to people that ask for it. And then there's what you call gharar, because the most common type of insurance is term life insurance, which means, okay, for 15, 20 years, I'm going to pay you this much. And then if I die in that time, you have to pay $500,000 or whatever, right? So I read a research on this. In term life insurance, between 1% and 2% of all of these actually have a payout. Meaning what? People end up living longer than they agree to, and then they get nothing. So they paid all that money in case I died. And then that goes. And the reason why they did it was they thought, well, I've got this home loan, I've got my wife, I've got my kids. If I die in the next 20 years, that'll be a big problem on them. So I'll just say 20 years. Then they live for 22, 23, 24 years, and then they don't get anything out of it, right? So term life insurance makes boatloads for them. And then they invest all this money into insurance, interest-bearing transactions and loans and things like that, in what they call, cash value premiums. So for me, I would agree with the scholars prohibiting life insurance, and I would say invest your money now, even if it's like $50 a month, $100 a month, into halal stock options, right? and put as much as you possibly can reasonably. If you're going to save money, put it into halal stock options, right? And give back your dividends through there. And so Muslims should be innovative, in whether it be insurance or we should have some co-op system that we use that is common in the Muslim world, where people pool money, but not as a for-profit venture. Things like healthcare and insurance are like, those are social welfare safety nets, right? Those should not be, for-profit industries where people make billions and we all, bear the brunt of this profit industry. No, we should just have a system where people pay in. There's an administrative group that, if it's needed, gives it out. If nothing happened to you, then you get a check back, minus the administrative costs of taking care of the people who are, their job is to take care of this responsibility. And it comes out to a nominal thing. And then every year people keep paying. And then based upon need, it is developed. It is sent out wherever it goes. So for me, I see it for some cases, there are scholars who seem to agree that the benefit outweighs the harm and that there's a necessity for some people in life insurance. I just don't see it. I think we need to, because those companies are big billion-dollar industries, billions of dollars industries, and they are concentrating all that wealth for themselves. And so we need to try to find ways of getting rid of all those big for-profit industries that monopolize all this wealth and create some sort of moral takaful. If Muslims will get together with moral Christians and moral humanists and others and say, you know what, let's just create the system for moral welfare, and then we'll create some jobs in administrative, and then we'll just basically, people will have almost cost nothing to them if they don't have a car crash or something like that, which most people don't, or in terms of life, put all the money together, when somebody dies, depending on the need of that situation and so forth, then they pay it out. Other than that, just there's always got to be some way to do what we call cooperative, social interaction to preserve wealth. So inshallah, I think that's investing in halal stocks. Yeah. So Wahid is all right, but there's some other ones. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send a list to the members. We'll make this as one of those member things. If you're not a member, please sign up to be a member, inshallah. So go ahead and go on the website under membership, and we'll send all these Islamic investment options that you can make good money buybacks. There's even portfolios that have been put together, inshallah. Amana funds is a good one as well. You'll get more in the long run out of Amana than Wahid. But inshallah, we'll send all that out, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. May Allah bless all of you. Tomorrow, inshallah, we're going to be talking about the census. A lot of Muslims don't realize that the census is very important for non-citizens. The census is not for citizens. We're going to talk about this in detail, all the benefits and needs for this. Everybody's getting those census things in the mail. You must fill them out. I'm going to give you a fatwa. It's an obligation in Islam to fill out the census. We're going to talk about it, inshallah, tomorrow. Jazakumullah khair. We'll see you tomorrow at 8:30. May Allah bless all of you, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.